Hello, listeners. Welcome to another engaging book summary. Today, we're diving into The Reaper of Washington County by Stephen Banner. This chilling tale takes us back to 1892 in Exeter, Rhode Island, where war, superstition, and eerie exhumations set the stage for an unforgettable story. Get comfortable as we explore the first chapter, The Exhumations. Chapter 1, The Exhumations. The story begins with Major Lancaster, a seasoned veteran of the Civil War. He served as a captain in General Grant's army and was severely wounded at the Battle of Cold Harbor. This injury prevented him from leading his troops to victory, marking one of Grant's few defeats. Despite being promoted to major, Lancaster never escaped the horrors of war, living with constant nightmares and the burden of his actions. Unlike Grant, who received accolades, Lancaster faded into obscurity, struggling with the ghosts of his past. Fast forward to March 15, 1892, in Exeter, Rhode Island, where the major is embroiled in a new conflict. He hires 4 men to exhume 3 bodies suspected of being vampires, responsible for the town's recent misfortunes. The men are reluctant, voicing their discomfort with the task. Despite their reservations, Lancaster's stern demeanor and promise of payment convince them to proceed. This part of the story vividly illustrates the superstitious atmosphere of rural Rhode Island and the power of local fears. Dr. Metcalf, the town's physician, enters the scene as a voice of reason. Educated at Brown University, Metcalf is well respected but vehemently opposes the exhumations, deeming them barbaric. The major, however, insists on his participation, citing the consent of George Brown, the father and husband of the deceased. This sets up a tension between scientific rationality and the town's superstitions, highlighting the broader conflict at play. The major meticulously prepares for the exhumations, gathering tools and supplies and enlisting young Jimmy Stetson to start fires to thaw the frozen ground. His interactions with townsfolk, including store owner John Manning and his daughter Anne, reveal the community's mixed feelings. Anne, in particular, urges her father to reconsider the exhumations, emphasizing the internal family dynamics and the broader societal impact. The tension in the town is palpable as they prepare for the night's grim task. As night falls, the eerie scene unfolds at the cemetery. The first 2 bodies, those of Mary Eliza Brown and her daughter Mary Olive Brown, show natural decomposition, disappointing the crowd expecting signs of vampirism. However, the discovery of Mercy Brown's preserved body ignites fear and hysteria. Her unusually preserved state, with long hair and nails, fuels the belief in her vampirism. An old spiritual advisor insists on a gruesome ritual to save Edwin Brown, who is believed to be afflicted by Mercy. Despite Dr. Metcalf's objections, the ritual proceeds amidst the crowd's mounting fear and desperation. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to our channel, where we dive into the heart of fascinating books. Today, we're continuing our journey through The Reaper of Washington County by Stephen Banner. In the first chapter, we encountered the eerie exhumations in Exeter, Rhode Island. Now, let's explore chapters 2 and 3, where we shift to new settings and delve deeper into our characters' lives. Chapter 2, A Life at Sea. Sean, our protagonist, has just returned to New Bedford, Massachusetts, from a 6-month whaling trip aboard the schooner Intrepid. It was his first experience in whaling, an adventure he embarked on with his friend Thomas Christian, thanks to Tom's uncle, Captain Christian. Life at sea was a mix of excitement and tedium. Sean and Tom performed deckhand duties, while the more experienced men handled the harpooning. The voyage ended early, and they were instructed to report to the captain's office on Monday. With some advance money in hand, Sean eagerly looked forward to reuniting with his mother and sister. Returning home, Sean experiences a mix of familiarity and apprehension. His home on Huddleston Street is just as he left it, a comforting two-story building with white walls and black shutters. However, his long absence makes him feel like a guest rather than a resident. His sister's greeting is warm but highlights how much has changed in his absence. His mother, though glad to see him, subtly disapproves of his maritime ambitions, hinting at her hopes to steer him away from a life at sea. Sean's room, untouched and welcoming, offers a stark contrast to the cramped, rough conditions aboard the Intrepid. Sean's mother's concerns about his future are palpable during their conversations. Despite the warmth of home, the reality of his father's recent passing casts a shadow over the household. The evening at the local pub with Tom brings a sense of normalcy. The pub, a familiar haunt, is alive with neighborhood faces and camaraderie. However, the encounter with Susie, involved in the numbers racket, and a mysterious, dangerous man, hints at the darker undercurrents in their community. Tom's flirtation with illegal activities adds tension, as Sean tries to steer him back to safer paths. Chapter 3, The Two-Gun Kid. Morning comes, and Sean's mother is off to the post office to mail a crucial letter to Captain James Callahan, Sean's uncle. She seeks his help in finding a safer, more respectable path for her son, hoping to pull him away from the dangers of the sea. Unaware of his mother's plea, Sean spends the day practicing shooting with Tom. The practice session highlights Sean's impressive marksmanship, a skill honed under his late father's guidance. This bonding activity provides a nostalgic escape from the uncertainties of his future. Tom's conversation reveals his own discontent with the life mapped out for him. He feels trapped by family expectations to work at sea. Sean, too, grapples with his direction in life, unsure whether to continue whaling or explore other opportunities. The afternoon practice session becomes a metaphor for their struggles. Hitting targets may be easy, but navigating life's complexities is far more challenging. Later, at the pub, Tom's frustration is evident when they witness Susie being mistreated by her dangerous associate. The tension between staying out of trouble and intervening weighs heavily on them. Friday arrives, and Sean heads to Captain Christian's office to discuss his future. Captain Christian's father, Benjamin, informs him that no ships in Gloucester need deckhands. Despite the disappointment, Benjamin's advice to wait for the Intrepid's return is sensible. Sean's determination to work and his respect for the Christian family's judgment are evident. The encounter between Captain Christian and his father afterward reveals their concern for Sean. They see potential in him and hope he finds his way, recognizing the importance of time and guidance in his journey. Chapter 4, Captain Callahan to the Rescue. Captain James Callahan's day starts with a rundown of his schedule from his efficient secretary, Katie. Among the mundane tasks is a letter from his sister, Mary Jane, and an appointment with Major Lancaster, his old commanding officer from the war. Intrigued by the letter and the unexpected visit, Captain Callahan takes a moment to read Mary Jane's plea for her son, Sean, before meeting with the Major. The reunion with Major Lancaster is warm and nostalgic, but the Major quickly gets to the point about his concerns in Exeter, Rhode Island. Major Lancaster explains the dire situation in Exeter, where an unknown illness, suspected to be consumption, has taken a significant toll on the population, claiming 27 lives. Additionally, 3 women have gone missing under mysterious circumstances, further unsettling the community. Despite investigations by the local doctor and even the state physician, no clear answers have emerged. Lancaster's request for help is urgent, driven by the growing fear and superstition among the townsfolk, exacerbated by a recent exhumation incident that has brought unwanted attention and ridicule to the town. Captain Callahan listens intently, weighing the implications. He acknowledges the seriousness of the situation but also the limitations of the federal marshal's jurisdiction without concrete evidence of a crime. However, recognizing his debt to the major and the gravity of the situation, he agrees to send someone to investigate. This decision not only sets the stage for potential intervention but also underscores the bonds of loyalty and duty that run deep between the two men. Lancaster leaves with a glimmer of hope, reassured by Callahan's commitment to helping him restore peace and order in Exeter. Chapter 5, A Marshal's Beginning. Sean returns home to a warm welcome and a delicious meal prepared by his mother. However, the evening takes a serious turn when she reveals that she has written to his uncle, Captain Callahan, about a job as a deputy marshal. Sean is initially surprised but understands the significance of his mother's actions. Recognizing the opportunity and the sense of duty that comes with it, he agrees to meet with his uncle in Boston. This marks the beginning of a pivotal transition from his life at sea to a potential career in law enforcement. Over the weekend, Sean prepares himself mentally and physically for the challenges ahead. He practices shooting, reflecting on the skills his father taught him and the legacy he aims to uphold. A chance encounter with his old girlfriend Leslie and a former friend, Chris, stirs feelings of rejection and determination. Sean's resolve to make something of himself is strengthened by these interactions, highlighting the personal stakes and motivations driving him forward. Arriving at his uncle's office, Sean faces a rigorous evaluation process. Captain Callahan lays out the expectations and challenges of being a deputy marshal, emphasizing the need for dedication and resilience. Sean's commitment is unwavering, and he quickly settles into the demanding training regimen. This chapter not only sets the foundation for Sean's new career but also illustrates the familial and personal influences shaping his path. Chapter 6, The Training. Training under the stern guidance of Sergeant Jameson and the supportive oversight of Bixby, Sean faces a series of grueling tests designed to push his physical and mental limits. The sergeant, a tough, seasoned Army veteran, subjects Sean to rigorous exercises, including a dangerous swim in the Charles River to test his endurance and resolve. Despite the challenges, Sean proves his mettle, impressing both Jameson and Bixby with his resilience and determination. Bixby, who handles the academic side of Sean's training, provides invaluable support, ensuring Sean is well prepared for the law exams. The physical and legal training are both critical components of becoming a marshal, and Sean dedicates himself fully to mastering both. The rigorous schedule and high expectations test Sean's limits, but he rises to the occasion, demonstrating his capability and commitment to the role. As Sean's training progresses, he faces the final hurdle, the law exam. His performance is exemplary, earning him high marks and validating the hard work he has put in. However, both Bixby and Sergeant Jameson emphasize that real-world experience is the ultimate test, and they recommend further field training under the guidance of experienced marshals. Captain Callahan, recognizing the potential in Sean but also the dangers ahead, prepares to assign him to a case that will put his skills to the test. Chapter 7, Harmon goes to jail. The morning started early for Sean, filled with a mix of anxiety and anticipation as he awaited his test results. Breakfast and horse-feeding chores were done with a sense of restless energy. At 9:30 a.m., Bixby arrived, offering only vague reassurance about Sean's fate. The ride to town felt interminable, with Sean on edge about his results. Once upstairs, Katie informed him that someone was already in the office. As he waited, Sean noticed a familiar face among the wanted posters on the wall. Eventually, his uncle called him in. After some pleasantries and coffee, the conversation turned serious. Sean had passed his exam and training. His uncle, however, had more to discuss. He needed Sean to get a suit tailored for a formal ceremony where the colonel would pin his badge. The real assignment was also revealed. Sean was to investigate the disappearance of 4 women in Exeter, Rhode Island. His orders were to gather evidence without engaging suspects and report findings immediately. This delicate and dangerous assignment required Sean to gain the trust of the townspeople and work closely with Major Lancaster, his uncle's former commanding officer. The conversation ended with stern warnings and instructions to keep a detailed journal. Sean's first stop after becoming a marshal was to visit his family. The emotional reunion with his mother and sister was heartwarming, fulfilling a promise he felt to his late father. Sean's old friend Tommy shared in the celebrations at a pub. However, the night took a turn when they encountered Harmon Getz, a violent man causing a scene. The situation escalated, leading Sean to arrest Getz with Tommy's help. The transport of Getz to Boston was tense but successful, with Sean and Tommy alert for any signs of trouble. Despite the risks, they managed to secure Getz in federal lockup without incident. The following morning, Sean faced his uncle's wrath for the reckless decision to involve civilians in a federal arrest. The scolding was intense, but Sean's sincere apology and explanation helped mitigate the situation somewhat. Sean introduced Tommy to his uncle, who expressed his thanks. Sean, instructed to head to Exeter immediately, left with a heavy heart, knowing he had to make things right. On the way, he reflected on his mistakes and the high stakes of his mission. Chapter 8, Off to Exeter. The journey to Exeter was uneventful, allowing Sean to reflect on his mission. Upon arrival, he found Exeter to be a typical small farming community. He met John Manning, a friendly storekeeper who directed him to Major Lancaster's office. The Major welcomed Sean warmly and gave him initial instructions, arranging for his horse to be taken care of and securing him lodging at the country inn. At the inn, Sean met Margaret, the owner, and admired her resilience and hospitality. He also encountered Anne, the Major's daughter, who seemed wary of him. After settling in, Sean noted the town's seemingly normal exterior but felt an undercurrent of tension, perhaps tied to the missing women. Chapter 9, Hearing the Evidence. The next morning, Sean had breakfast at the inn and observed the bustling dining room. He then met with Major Lancaster, who provided a sparse file on the missing women. Sean learned their names and basic details: Dawn Sparks, Karen Abrams, and Tracy Mahoney. Tracy, a widow with a young son, was the last to go missing. Her disappearance was particularly troubling given her son's dependency and her mother's failing health. Sean's interview with Tracy's mother, Martha, was poignant. Martha confirmed that Tracy had walked into town for supplies the day she disappeared. She provided Sean with a sweater for the search dogs and expressed her desperation, revealing her terminal illness and concern for her grandson. The meeting strengthened Sean's resolve to find answers. Sean requested tracking dogs from the Major, who arranged for Tiny, a local dog handler, to assist. The search began early the next morning, with Tiny's skilled Redbone coonhounds leading the way. The search yielded a crucial piece of evidence: Tracy's handbag, found with her money still inside, indicating foul play. The discovery intensified the investigation, as Sean realized the likelihood of a killer in the community. Chapter 10, Finding Something of Tracy. The identification of Tracy's bag by Martha confirmed Sean's suspicions. He needed to talk to the townspeople and gather more information. His next stop was the pastor, Brian Hebert. Sean's initial impression of the pastor was mixed, but their conversation didn't reveal any direct connections to the missing women. The pastor seemed harmless, albeit odd. Sean's daily patrols and interactions with the townsfolk painted a picture of a community on edge, grappling with fear and uncertainty. His meeting with the major revealed a complicated relationship between Anne and the pastor, further muddying the waters. The major confided in Sean about the pastor's sexuality, adding another layer of complexity to the investigation. Throughout the day, Sean continued to gather information, mindful of the delicate dynamics at play. His interactions with Margaret provided a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. As the investigation deepened, Sean remained vigilant, knowing that solving the mystery of the missing women was crucial for the safety and peace of Exeter. Chapter 11, A Letter from Robert. Callahan heads down to Margaret's dining room, bustling as usual. He sees Anne, the waitress, who pointedly ignores him, so he decides to play along and not acknowledge her either. Instead, the other waitress takes his order and brings him coffee. While having his breakfast, Callahan tries to keep his mind focused on the upcoming meeting with Dr. Metcalf, unsure of what to expect from the small-town doctor. After finishing his meal and exchanging pleasantries with Margaret, Callahan walks to Dr. Metcalf's office, which is conveniently located near other key town spots like John Holmes, attorney at law, and the post office. Upon entering the doctor's office, he's greeted by a tall man in a white lab coat who introduces himself as Dr. Metcalf. The doctor squints as if adjusting to the light, having spent his morning peering into a microscope. Callahan introduces himself as a deputy marshal from Boston investigating the missing women. Dr. Metcalf, aware of his presence through the major, agrees to answer his questions and invites him to the back room, which doubles as an examination room and a research area. The room is filled with jars of tissue samples, and Dr. Metcalf explains his work studying the effects of different medicines on diseased tissue. Despite the impressive scientific setup, Dr. Metcalf has little to offer regarding the missing women. He barely knew them and none were his patients, implying they were likely healthy and had no reason to seek medical help. When Callahan brings up a rumor about the women possibly leaving town due to pregnancies, Dr. Metcalf dismisses it, noting no such cases came to him. Turning his attention to a service road behind the doctor's office, Callahan asks about the worn-down path, suspecting frequent use by wagons. Dr. Metcalf is oblivious to its condition, suggesting Callahan speak with the undertaker, George Cranston, for answers. Callahan thanks Dr. Metcalf for his time and heads out, determined to pursue this new lead. Back at the inn, the next day brings a surprise. A postal clerk named Robert arrives with a letter for Anne. Curious and somewhat puzzled by the anonymous delivery method, Anne quickly opens it. The letter is from Pastor Brian, urgently requesting a meeting at the church that afternoon. Anne's reaction is one of nervous excitement, hoping for something significant from the pastor. Despite Margaret's caution, Anne is eager and leaves early to meet him. Arriving at the church, Anne finds the main door locked and heads towards Pastor Brian's private quarters. Peeking through a window, she's horrified to see the pastor engaged in a romantic encounter with a young man. Devastated and confused, she realizes the letter might not have been from the pastor but from someone aiming to hurt her. Anne suspects Callahan, leading to a tense confrontation where she slaps him in the dining room, accusing him of treachery. Callahan is bewildered, maintaining his innocence while the townspeople watch in shock. Determined to clear his name and solve the mystery, Callahan continues his investigation. He meets with the Major to discuss the unfruitful conversation with Dr. Metcalf and expresses frustration over the service road's frequent use, suggesting it might hold clues. The Major confirms the undertaker's occasional use of the road but offers no further insights. Callahan decides to follow up with George Cranston, whose shop is nearby. The undertaker, George Cranston, is a peculiar figure, an elderly man with round glasses and a pronounced belly. His workspace is cluttered with boards and coffins, indicating a busy trade. Callahan questions him about the missing women, but Cranston knows little about them, offering no new leads. He confirms his occasional use of the service road for funeral processions but cannot explain its heavy wear. Frustrated but resolute, Callahan wraps up his visit with Cranston and heads back to the inn. The atmosphere remains tense, especially with Anne's recent outburst. Callahan reflects on the elusive nature of his investigation, noting how the townspeople seem either ignorant or deliberately unhelpful. Later, Callahan decides to get a haircut and visit the barber shop across the street. The barber, Russell "Rusty" Banks, is a chatty fellow with a well-kept shop. While trimming Callahan's hair, Rusty shares his perspective on the town, mentioning how people here prefer to keep to themselves. Rusty's account aligns with Callahan's observations of the town's secretive nature. Rusty recalls an incident from a few months ago when he heard a scream during a stormy night. Rusty and John Manning, the supply store owner, stepped outside but saw nothing, attributing the noise to the fierce wind. Callahan's interest is piqued, as Rusty's story hints at potential witnesses or events related to the missing women. However, Rusty downplays it, suggesting it could have been anything. As Callahan leaves the barber shop, he ponders Rusty's story and decides to visit John Manning's supply store to follow up. The store is well stocked, and Manning seems like a hard-working, practical man. Callahan questions him about the scream, but Manning dismisses it, claiming he heard nothing unusual that night. Frustrated, Callahan senses Manning might be withholding information. Back at the inn, the day concludes with Callahan reviewing his notes and strategizing his next moves. He realizes the investigation is far from over and the town holds more secrets than he initially thought. Determined to uncover the truth, Callahan braces himself for the challenges ahead. ### Chapter 12, A Boy and a Mission. The search party is divided into groups, with Callahan and the Major leading on horseback. Callahan takes the east side while the Major covers the west. The search proves challenging as daylight fades, and the temperature drops, making the mission even more urgent. Callahan's determination and sharp instincts pay off when he hears rustling noises ahead. He dismounts and cautiously approaches, discovering 4 coy wolves circling a pine tree. Realizing someone is trapped up there, Callahan fires his gun to scare off the coy wolves, successfully dispersing them. He calls out and discovers Billy, scared but unharmed, hiding in the tree. Callahan carefully retrieves Billy and they set up a camp for the night, knowing it's too dangerous to travel back in the dark. They build a fire to keep warm and ward off any returning coy wolves. Sharing food and keeping watch, Callahan reassures Billy, promising they will be safe until morning. The next day, they begin their journey back to town, with Billy riding in front of Callahan on Max. As they approach the town, the church bell rings, signaling their return. The townspeople, led by the Major, rush out to welcome them. The rescue is a rare moment of joy and relief, temporarily lifting the dark cloud over the community. Back at the inn, Callahan reflects on the events. He knows the rescue of Billy is only a small victory. The mystery of the missing women looms larger than ever, and the tension in the town is palpable. Callahan is determined to continue his investigation, suspecting that the answer lies within the town itself, not in the wilderness. Realizing he needs more information, Callahan decides to visit the Nipmuc Indian camp, hoping they can provide insights about the woods and any potential threats. The journey to the camp is uneventful, and Callahan is cautious, aware of the delicate nature of this interaction. Upon arrival, he's greeted by the Nipmuc chief, who remembers him from the supply store. Callahan offers blankets in exchange for information. The chief appreciates the gesture but is clear that the Nipmuc have seen no animals capable of killing the women. He suggests the culprit is likely a human, a chilling revelation that aligns with Callahan's suspicions. This conversation reinforces Callahan's belief that the threat is not from wild animals but from someone within or connected to the town. He thanks the chief and returns to town, determined to follow this new lead. The chief's warning about the killer being aware of Callahan's investigation adds to the sense of urgency and danger. Callahan continues his rounds, speaking with townspeople and re-interviewing those who might have information. He visits Barney, the market owner, who expresses fear for his family's safety and the town's future. Callahan reassures him but senses that Barney, like others, is holding back information. Returning to the inn, Callahan discusses his findings with Margaret, who shares the town's fear of the night and the unknown threats. She reveals that people rarely venture out after dark, a behavior rooted in long-standing fear. Callahan realizes this pervasive fear might be linked to the missing women and other dark secrets the town harbors. That evening, Callahan writes letters to his uncle and mother, updating them on his progress. He reflects on the complexity of the investigation, knowing he must unravel the town's secrets to find the killer. His resolve is stronger than ever as he prepares for the challenges ahead. Chapter 13, A Marshal Stands Alone. The reporter, Sam Burrows, is thorough, interviewing Callahan and learning about his background and the ongoing investigation. Callahan ensures Burrows focuses on the boy's rescue, avoiding details that might compromise his investigation into the missing women. Burrows is intrigued, promising to return for the full story once the case is solved. As the town enjoys a brief respite, Callahan remains focused on his mission. He learns from Margaret that Mrs. Mahoney is in critical condition, unlikely to survive. This news adds urgency to Callahan's investigation, knowing Billy will need protection and care if his grandmother passes. Determined to find the truth, Callahan resumes his interviews with townsfolk. He visits the laundry service owners, Theodore and Victoria Welch, who, like others, claim to know nothing about the missing women. Their business has been in town for 25 years, but they have no insights to offer, adding to Callahan's frustration. Callahan then speaks with young Jimmy Stetson, who has been helpful with odd jobs around town. Jimmy's observation that someone might have taken the women for a specific reason resonates with Callahan. It's a simple yet profound insight, suggesting a motive beyond random violence. To explore further, Callahan decides to visit the Nipmuc Indian camp again, this time bringing more blankets as a gesture of goodwill. He's met with the same cautious but respectful reception. The chief reiterates that no wild animals are responsible for the women's disappearance, reinforcing Callahan's belief that the threat is human. On his return, Callahan reflects on the lack of evidence pointing to an animal attack. He's convinced the culprit is someone within the town or closely connected to it. This realization strengthens his resolve to uncover the town's secrets and protect its residents. Callahan's conversation with the major reveals the town's collective fear and the potential economic collapse if the mystery remains unsolved. The major's frustration mirrors Callahan's, but he provides support and access to his notes on the townspeople. This gesture indicates the Major's trust in Callahan and his desperation for resolution. Back at the inn, Callahan and Margaret discuss the town's eerie behavior and fear of the night. Margaret admits she never ventures out after dark, a sentiment shared by many residents. Callahan realizes this fear is deeply ingrained, possibly linked to past events and the current mystery. The chapter ends with Callahan writing in his journal, documenting the day's findings and planning his next steps. He understands the gravity of his task, knowing he must solve the case to prevent further harm and restore peace to the town. His determination is unwavering as he prepares for the challenges ahead. Chapter 14, Mrs. Mahoney, rest in peace. As morning breaks, we find out that Mrs. Mahoney's condition has worsened. Dr. Metcalf, ever diligent, administers laudanum to ease her pain and keep her comfortable, and is given instructions to provide the medication every 2 to 3 hours. Pastor Brian visits early to pray over Mrs. Mahoney, offering spiritual comfort in her final moments. Meanwhile, the Major makes burial arrangements with George, the undertaker, knowing the ground is frozen and difficult to dig through. A tense exchange ensues as the Major and George negotiate the extra cost and effort required to dig a grave in such conditions. Throughout the day, Callahan stays in his room, making sure his journal is up to date. He knows his uncle will want a detailed account of everything happening in Exeter. By 2 o'clock, Mrs. Mahoney takes her last breath, with Anne holding her hand the entire time. The Major keeps young Billy occupied, teaching him about running a town, a poignant moment given the boy's loss. Mrs. Mahoney is immediately taken to George's place and then to the cemetery. Pastor Brian reads from the Book of Common Prayer, a solemn ritual that brings back memories of Callahan's own father's service. The atmosphere at the gravesite is heavy with grief. Billy cries, and Anne, doing her best to console him, cries alongside him. As the sky darkens and a light mist begins to fall, most of the townspeople leave, but Callahan stays, reflecting on the promise he made to Mrs. Mahoney about finding her daughter, Tracy. Determined to continue his investigation, Callahan heads to the livery stable where Charlie is readying his horse, Max. Despite the impending storm, Callahan sets off to the Mahoney farm, driven by a hunch that something crucial awaits him there. He needs to ensure no one has tampered with the farm, suspecting it might hold clues. Upon arriving at the farmhouse, Callahan discovers the front door slightly ajar, hinting at a hurried departure. He clears the house, ensuring it's empty, then tends to Max in the barn. Preparing for a long night, Callahan devises a plan, setting up a trap for anyone who might attempt to break in. He locks the front door but leaves a window open as a point of entry. Taking a chair from the kitchen, he positions himself by a window facing the road, keeping a vigilant watch. By noon, his patience pays off as he spots two heads peeking from behind a tree. The Corbett brothers approach the house, clearly intent on looting it. Callahan hides in a closet, waiting for them to enter through the open window. When they do, he steps out, gun drawn, and commands them to stop. Despite a brief struggle, during which the older brother throws his gun at Callahan, injuring him above the left eye, Callahan subdues them both and arrests them. Bloodied but resolute, Callahan marches the brothers back to town. The sight of him leading the cuffed brothers through Main Street, with blood dripping from his wound, draws the townspeople's attention. Charlie, ever loyal, supports Callahan with a pitchfork, ensuring the brothers don't attempt to escape. The Major, concerned about Callahan's injury, insists he sees the doctor immediately. At Dr. Metcalf's office, Callahan undergoes a painful but necessary procedure to suture his wound. The doctor assures him his vision is unharmed but warns of a permanent scar. The doctor's candid demeanor offers a moment of levity amidst the tension. Margaret, always caring, supports Callahan through the ordeal, while Anne waits outside, worried but silent. The Major and Charlie secure the brothers at the blacksmith's barn, highlighting the town's need for a proper jail. This practical concern underscores the broader issues Callahan faces as he works to bring order and safety to Exeter. The Major acknowledges this, promising to address the town's infrastructure needs. As Callahan recovers, he continues to document his findings and strategize his next moves. He knows he must interrogate the Corbett brothers thoroughly, though he doubts their involvement in the women's disappearances. His instincts tell him they are petty criminals rather than masterminds behind the abductions. Anne, realizing her earlier misjudgment of Callahan, approaches him to apologize. Their conversation is a tentative step towards mutual understanding and respect. Callahan appreciates her honesty and reassures her of his dedication to solving the case. The arrival of Constable Tom Holmes from Providence marks a significant development. Holmes is there to take the Corbett brothers into custody. This procedural shift gives Callahan a brief respite but also reinforces the urgency of his mission. He hands over a detailed report to Holmes, ensuring the brothers' crimes are properly documented. In his interactions with the townspeople, Callahan senses a mixture of fear, suspicion, and hope. The laundry service owners, the Welches, reveal little about the missing women, maintaining the town's air of secrecy. Even old Simon, the elderly father of Mrs. Welch, offers cryptic gestures rather than concrete information. Callahan's investigation into Francisco Escobar, a potential suspect linked to multiple deaths, adds another layer of complexity. Margaret confirms Escobar's brief stay in Exeter, noting his odd behavior and quick departure. Callahan realizes that Escobar might be a significant lead, though not directly connected to the missing women. Reflecting on his progress, Callahan decides to visit Hope Valley, where another woman, Melissa Forbes, went missing. He hopes the townspeople there will be more forthcoming with information. His journey is marked by beautiful, tranquil landscapes, a stark contrast to the grim task ahead. In Hope Valley, Callahan meets Nathan Landry, the town's surveyor and unofficial law enforcer. Landry proves to be a valuable ally, arranging for Callahan to stay with Mrs. Phillips and facilitating his interviews with the townspeople. Callahan's conversation with John Forbes, Melissa's husband, is heart-wrenching. John's pain and determination to find out what happened to his wife echo Callahan's own resolve. Callahan's investigation reveals the strong community ties in Hope Valley, unlike the secretive nature of Exeter. The townspeople's emotional responses and willingness to help stand in stark contrast to the evasiveness Callahan encountered before. As Callahan prepares to return to Exeter, the Nipmuc chief's warning about a man of great sin coming for him adds a foreboding note. The chief's dream suggests an imminent confrontation, heightening the tension and urgency of Callahan's mission. Got it? Let's continue with summaries for chapters 15 and 16 from The Reaper of Washington County by Stephen Banner. Here are the summaries tailored for your YouTube audience. Hashtag Chapter 15, A New Pastor Comes. While our protagonist, Marshal Sean Callahan, is recovering from his injuries, the Major receives visitors at his office, the new pastor, Pastor Bill, and his wife, Helen. They are here to replace Pastor Brian, who has been sent back for further religious training amidst swirling rumors about his conduct. The arrival of Pastor Bill and Helen brings a mix of relief and curiosity among the townspeople. Anne Lancaster, the Major's daughter, is the first to meet the new pastor and his wife. Pastor Bill is a slim man with a neatly trimmed beard and glasses, exuding a sense of calm authority. Helen, with her long, shiny blonde hair and small stature, stands confidently by his side. They introduce themselves and express their eagerness to take over the church's responsibilities. Anne, surprised but courteous, offers to fetch her father, the Major. At the stable, the Major and Charlie are tending to their horses, which are finally starting to look healthy and well cared for. Anne informs her father about the visitors, and he hurries back to his office. There, he warmly welcomes Pastor Bill and Helen, expressing his pleasure at their arrival and assuring them of the town's friendliness and godliness. After a brief, cordial exchange, the Major excuses himself, allowing the pastor and his wife to head to their new home. Callahan wakes up later in the day, makes entries in his logbook, and observes the new pastor's wagon arriving at the church. He learns that Pastor Brian has already departed without any farewells, leaving Pastor Bill to address the town's concerns about the sudden change. During his evening rounds, Callahan notices the town signs swaying in the increasing wind, signaling the onset of colder weather. He slips into dark alleys, waiting for any unusual sounds, but finds the town eerily quiet. When he reaches the end of town, he sees the church lit up, almost like a beacon, and contemplates the new pastor's arrival and its implications. Inside the Major's office, Anne confronts her father about writing to the deacon to replace Pastor Brian. The Major, defensive at first, explains that he believed it was time for a change for the town's and Anne's sake. Anne, understanding but still hurt, expresses her wish to be trusted with such decisions in the future. The conversation is tense but ultimately strengthens their bond as they navigate the town's complexities together. The next morning, Callahan meets Pastor Bill and Helen at the market. Their eagerness to start their new chapter in Exeter is apparent. Anne approaches Callahan, offering an apology for her earlier behavior and asking if they can start fresh. Callahan accepts, appreciating the gesture and the opportunity to build a positive relationship with her. A new development arises as Constable Tom Holmes from Providence arrives to take the Corbett brothers into custody. Callahan provides Holmes with a detailed report and prepares the brothers for transport. The sight of the brothers shackled and escorted through town by Callahan and Holmes draws attention from the townspeople, emphasizing the importance of law and order in Exeter. Back at the laundry service, Callahan speaks with the Welches again, seeking more information about the missing women. Despite their limited knowledge, he remains hopeful that every small detail might contribute to solving the case. Old Simon, though mostly unresponsive, adds a layer of mystery with his cryptic gestures. Margaret helps Callahan investigate Francisco Escobar, a potential suspect linked to multiple deaths. She recalls Escobar's brief and peculiar stay in Exeter, noting his strange behavior and quick departure. This lead, though not directly connected to the missing women, adds another layer to Callahan's investigation. As Callahan prepares for his trip to Hope Valley, he reflects on his progress and the challenges ahead. He knows that time is running out and that he must find answers soon. In Hope Valley, Callahan meets Nathan Landry, the town surveyor and de facto law enforcer. Nathan helps Callahan get settled and arranges for him to meet Melissa Forbes's family, another victim in the string of mysterious disappearances. The interview with Melissa's husband, John Forbes, is heart-wrenching, filled with grief and frustration. John's pain and desperation for answers mirror the emotions Callahan has encountered throughout his investigation. The people of Hope Valley, unlike those in Exeter, are more open and supportive. They share their memories of Melissa, offering insights and showing solidarity. This stark contrast gives Callahan hope that he might finally uncover some vital clues. ###Chapter 16, On to Hope Valley. Early the next morning, Callahan sets out for Hope Valley, following the Beaver River south and then crossing over to head west. His destination is Nathan Landry, the town surveyor and sometimes law enforcer. Hope Valley, unlike Exeter, has a reputation for its industrious nature, with several mills producing wool and other cloth. The town's name origin is obscure, adding an air of mystery to Callahan's journey. As Callahan travels, he passes by the tranquil Nipmuc Indian village and enjoys the natural beauty of Rhode Island. The serene landscape contrasts sharply with the grim task at hand. He stops at a fast-moving creek to let his horse, Max, drink and fill his canteen, reflecting on the simplicity and peace of nature. Upon reaching Hope Valley, Callahan is struck by its normalcy. The town appears bustling, with shops and mills scattered about. He quickly locates Nathan Landry's office, marked by a sign reading Nathan Landry, Surveyor of Lands. Inside, he finds Nathan, a heavy-set man with a round, friendly face, working amidst a sea of maps and gas lights. Nathan is eager to assist and has already arranged accommodations for Callahan at Mrs. Phillips' large Victorian home. After settling Max at the livery stable, Callahan heads to Mrs. Phillips' home. She is a gracious host, showing him to a luxurious room with a large canopy bed. The house is impressive, with multiple bedrooms and bathrooms, a wraparound porch, and well-maintained grounds. Mrs. Phillips, ever the hospitable widow, offers lunch, and Callahan appreciates the warm meal and hospitality. Later, Nathan accompanies Callahan to the Forbes residence. John Forbes, Melissa's husband, and their two young sons meet them. John is tall and clean-shaven, and his sons look at Callahan with curiosity. They lead Callahan into their modest home, where John offers coffee and begins recounting the day Melissa disappeared. Melissa, a beloved schoolteacher, left for school one Monday morning as usual. She did her shopping in town afterward and then started home. By 3 o'clock, when she hadn't returned, John grew worried and went to look for her. He found their wagon by the roadside, with groceries untouched and her purse still there, but no sign of Melissa. John's anguish is palpable as he recounts the fruitless search for his wife. The entire town had rallied to find her, but no clues emerged. Callahan senses the depth of John's loss and the frustration of unanswered questions. The lack of any struggle or theft at the scene suggests a planned abduction, aligning with the cases in Exeter. After the interview, Callahan examines the wagon, finding no evidence to aid the investigation. The emotional weight of the visit hangs heavy as he and Nathan return to town. The community's love and respect for Melissa are evident, but so is their desperation for closure. Back in Nathan's office, Callahan sets up a temporary base, inviting townsfolk to share any information they might have. The response is overwhelming. People come to offer support, recount their memories of Melissa, and express their hopes for her return. The stark contrast to the secrecy in Exeter is refreshing, giving Callahan a sense of solidarity. As the day ends, Callahan prepares to leave Hope Valley, grateful for the insights gained but aware of the immense challenge ahead. Nathan's family hosts him for a final meal, where stories of adventure and laughter provide a brief respite from the grim reality. On his journey back, Callahan encounters the Nipmuc chief once more. The chief, with a grave expression, warns Callahan of a vision and imminent deadly confrontation with a man of great sin. This prophecy underscores the urgency and danger of Callahan's mission. Chapter 17, A Marshal Takes a Time Out. Upon returning to Exeter late Wednesday afternoon, the day before Thanksgiving, Callahan stops by the Major's office. Anne is there handling business, and they exchange a few words about his recent trip to Hope Valley. Callahan shares the somber news about the missing woman, a beloved teacher, and admits there are no new leads. Despite the lack of progress, and the town still have faith in his efforts, though Callahan himself is plagued by self-doubt. Anne mentions that the Major and Billy are at the stable, hinting at Billy's growing fondness for her father. She invites Callahan to join them for Thanksgiving dinner at the inn, but he declines, citing other plans. As he leaves, Anne reassures him that everyone knows he's doing his best, a sentiment Callahan struggles to internalize. After their conversation, Callahan decides it might be wise to teach Anne how to shoot, given the potential dangers. He recalls seeing an 1877 Colt double-action Lightning, a .38 caliber gun, at the hardware store, and plans to buy it for her. This precaution seems timely, as the pattern of women going missing every 6 months looms ominously, and it's been 6 months since the last disappearance. Back in his room, Callahan logs his visit to Hope Valley. The similarities between the cases in Hope Valley and Exeter are troubling. He reflects on the lack of blood evidence, the absence of enemies, and the eerie quiet surrounding the crime scenes. The unknown assailant's intelligence or luck weighs heavily on his mind. The next morning, Thanksgiving, Callahan writes letters to his mother and uncle, updating them on his situation. He then heads to the post office, where a letter from Joe, the tavern owner back home, awaits him. Joe expresses interest in moving to Exeter and taking over the inn, a prospect that fills Callahan with hope for Margaret's future. Callahan shares the good news with Margaret, who is thrilled at the possibility of returning home. He then heads to the hardware store to finalize the purchase of the Colt for Anne. John, the store owner, is supportive, recognizing the importance of Anne having protection. In the Major's office, Callahan discusses his findings from Hope Valley and the ongoing investigation. He asks about Anne's familiarity with firearms and learns she's never used one. The Major agrees that Anne should have a gun for protection. As Callahan prepares for a solitary Thanksgiving, he encounters Charlie at the stable, who expresses surprise at his departure. Callahan explains he needs time alone to gather his thoughts. He rides out to a hill overlooking the town, reflecting on his investigation and the unresolved cases. The tranquility of the night contrasts sharply with the weight of his thoughts. Returning to town the next day, Callahan stops by the post office to send his letters and receives a letter from Joe. He reads it eagerly, feeling optimistic about the future. He then shares the news with Margaret, who is overjoyed. Later, Callahan heads to the Major's office, where they discuss the recent developments. The Major reveals that Anne and Billy were worried about Callahan missing Thanksgiving dinner. Callahan promises to visit the doctor to remove his sutures and plans to buy the gun for Anne. In a quiet moment, the Major expresses gratitude for Callahan's efforts, particularly in finding Billy. The Major's concern for his town and family is evident, adding to Callahan's sense of responsibility. Callahan ends the day by practicing shooting with Anne, teaching her how to handle the Colt. She shows promise, and Callahan feels reassured knowing she has some means of protection. Chapter 18, Curtis Corbett comes to town. Callahan confronts Curtis, ordering him to drop the knife. Curtis, drunken and belligerent, taunts Callahan, but the situation is defused when the Major intervenes, convincing Curtis to leave. Despite Curtis's threats, no one presses charges, but Callahan recognizes Curtis as a significant danger to the town. Following the incident, Callahan decides to investigate Curtis further. The Major, although skeptical, agrees to accompany Callahan when the time comes to question Curtis. Callahan's suspicions about Curtis deepen when he learns that Curtis lives near the Mahoney farm, close to where one of the missing women resided. The Major downplays Curtis's threat, but Callahan is determined to explore every lead. The next morning, Callahan heads to the supply store to finalize the purchase of a colt for Anne. During his visit, he hears townsfolk discussing the previous night's incident, reinforcing Curtis's unpopularity and the fear he instills in the community. Callahan then sends a telegraph to Nathan Landry in Hope Valley, seeking information about Curtis's presence during the time of Melissa's disappearance and any sightings of Francisco Escobar. As Callahan and Anne ride out of town for target practice, they encounter Curtis again, this time transporting pigs to an auction in Hope Valley. The tense exchange solidifies Callahan's suspicion that Curtis might be involved in the women's disappearances. Curtis's evasive and hostile behavior convinces Callahan that a thorough investigation is necessary. Callahan spends the day teaching Anne how to shoot, emphasizing the importance of being able to protect herself. Anne shows promise, and Callahan feels more comfortable knowing she can handle the colt. He also plans to discuss Curtis further with the Major, aware that the man's proximity to the Mahoney farm and his erratic behavior make him a prime suspect. That evening, Callahan joins Anne and the Major for dinner. Despite the pleasant company, the conversation inevitably returns to Curtis. The Major still doubts Curtis's involvement, but Callahan insists that Curtis needs to be ruled out as a suspect. The Major agrees to accompany Callahan when they question Curtis, stressing the importance of eliminating him from the investigation. After dinner, Callahan returns to the inn, where he catches up with Margaret. She is preparing for the arrival of Joe and his wife, potential buyers for the inn. Margaret shows Callahan her private living area, expressing her readiness to move on and return home. Their conversation touches on the strange events in Exeter, including the graves that were dug up during the vampire scare, which Margaret dismisses as foolishness. Back in his room, Callahan reflects on the day's events. The cold, eerie atmosphere of the inn, especially in the back rooms facing the service road, amplifies his sense of urgency. He records his interactions with Curtis, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. As he tries to sleep, thoughts of the missing women and the elusive Francisco Escobar plague his mind. Determined to find answers, Callahan knows time is running out. Chapter 19, Margaret decides to sell. As the investigation progresses, Callahan starts his nightly rounds early, aware of the mounting pressure to solve the case. The town is quiet, the cold November air hinting at the approaching winter. He joins the Major for coffee, discussing Curtis Corbett and the upcoming visit from Joe and his wife. The Major remains skeptical about Curtis's involvement, but Callahan insists on a thorough investigation. Dinner at the Major's house provides a brief respite, with Anne serving a delicious meal. The conversation, however, circles back to the case. Callahan emphasizes the need to investigate Curtis fully, even if it means ruling him out. The Major agrees but remains unconvinced of Curtis's guilt. The next day, Callahan receives a telegraph response from Nathan in Hope Valley, confirming Curtis's presence there during Melissa's disappearance. This information strengthens Callahan's resolve to confront Curtis. Meanwhile, Joe and his wife arrive in Exeter, eager to see the inn and meet Margaret. Margaret shows Joe and his wife around the inn, highlighting its potential. They are impressed, and Margaret is pleased with their enthusiasm. Callahan feels hopeful that the sale will provide Margaret with the fresh start she desires. That night, Callahan returns to his room, contemplating his next steps. The cold, isolated atmosphere of the inn's back rooms contrasts sharply with the warmth of the community he hopes to protect. Determined to gather more evidence against Curtis, Callahan knows he must act quickly. Hashtag Chapter 20, Nathan's Reply. November 28, 1894, began like any other day for Marshal Sean Callahan. He enjoyed a hearty breakfast at the inn, noting the mild weather and the pleasant atmosphere. Margaret and the staff had worked tirelessly to prepare the inn for the arrival of potential buyers, Joe and his wife. The place looked splendid, adorned with fresh flowers and a gleaming chandelier in the lobby. Callahan decided to stay in town to greet the guests and finalize some letters, one to his uncle about Curtis Corbett and another to his mother. At the post office, Callahan received a long-awaited telegram from Nathan Landry in Hope Valley. Nathan's response confirmed Curtis Corbett's frequent visits to Hope Valley, where he sold pigs and often got drunk. Nathan couldn't confirm Curtis's presence during Melissa's disappearance but advised further investigation. Callahan knew he needed to question Curtis more thoroughly and keep an eye on the inn for Joe and his wife's arrival. Callahan complimented Margaret on the inn's appearance, noting her nervousness, and joined the conversation, and Callahan shared his plans to pause the investigation while Joe and his wife toured the inn to avoid making the place seem like a bad investment. The Major, Billy, and Callahan awaited the guests' arrival at the Major's office. When the carriage arrived, Callahan restrained his eagerness and followed the Major's plan to let Joe and his wife meet Margaret first. The Major's calm demeanor and the casual introduction helped put everyone at ease. After a hearty lunch, Margaret took Joe and his wife on a detailed tour of the inn, and they spent the afternoon discussing business details. Joe expressed concerns about the safety of Exeter due to the ongoing investigation into the missing women. Callahan reassured him, promising to resolve the issue soon and advising Joe to take time before making any decisions about purchasing the inn. That evening, Joe and Callahan had a candid discussion about the investigation. Joe's primary concern was the safety of the town, especially for his children. Callahan reiterated his commitment to finding the culprit and suggested Joe tell Margaret they needed more time to think things over. Joe agreed to wait for Callahan's signal before making any final decisions. The next morning, the Major and Callahan met with migrant workers, Maria and Ethan, who were visiting the Mahoney farm. They had come to see Tracy Mahoney, unaware of her disappearance and Mrs. Mahoney's death. Callahan warned them about the potential danger in the area, advising them to keep a gun close. As Callahan approached Curtis Corbett's farm, he was determined to clear Curtis as a suspect. However, the situation quickly escalated. Curtis, armed with a rifle, blindsided Callahan, but the Major arrived just in time. In a tense standoff, the Major shot Curtis, who died from the gunshot wound. Callahan and the Major were left to process the incident and secure the farm. Callahan and the Major searched the Corbett farm, but found no evidence of the missing women. They arranged for Tiny and his cadaver dogs to search the property thoroughly. Despite their efforts, no bodies were found, leading to a disappointing conclusion. Callahan reported the results to his uncle and received orders to return to Boston for reassignment. The realization that the investigation was being terminated weighed heavily on Callahan. There will be no this inserted audio clip if you buy the software license key or activation key. He informed the Major, Margaret, and Anne about his departure. The Major reassured him that he had done a fine job, despite the lack of resolution. Callahan's heartfelt speech at the church aimed to encourage anyone with information to come forward, but no new leads emerged. As Callahan prepared to leave, he reflected on his time in Exeter and the friendships he had formed. He left a letter for Margaret, expressing his gratitude. The next morning, Callahan left the inn quietly, saying goodbye to the Major and Anne from a distance. He headed to the train station, prepared to return to Boston and face his next assignment. At the station, while reviewing his journal, a note fell out. It contained writing he didn't recognize, hinting at an unexpected development just as he was about to leave Exeter. Chapter 21, Curtis is dead. The Major began his morning routine, contemplating the pleasant weather and the clear sky. His destination was the livery stable, where he expected to find Charlie tending to the horses. The Major, however, was startled to learn from Charlie that Marshal Callahan had already left for Curtis Corbett's farm alone. Alarmed, the Major hurriedly prepared his horse and set off to catch up with Callahan. Upon arriving at Curtis's farm, the Major witnessed Curtis taking aim at an unsuspecting Callahan. The Major's swift actions prevented a tragedy. He shouted Curtis's name and fired a warning shot. Curtis turned to face the Major, but before he could fire his rifle, the Major shot him in the chest. Curtis fell, mortally wounded, and died shortly after. The Major, distressed by the outcome, reflected on his long acquaintance with Curtis and the tragedy of the situation. The investigation now required a thorough search of Curtis's farm. Callahan, determined to find any evidence, scoured the main house and the surrounding barns. The filthy and disorganized state of Curtis's home offered no clues, and a day's worth of searching yielded nothing. The next day, Tiny and his cadaver dogs arrived to assist in the search, scouring the property for any signs of the missing women. As Callahan and the Major discussed their findings, they were interrupted by Bert, a local farmer, interested in purchasing Curtis's hogs. Bert's timely arrival and swift purchase of the animals removed one task from their list but offered no leads in the investigation. For 3 days, Tiny and his dogs searched the farm meticulously, but their efforts turned up empty. The realization hit Callahan hard: if Curtis had disposed of the women by feeding their bodies to the hogs, there would be no trace left to find. Despite their exhaustive search, they had nothing concrete to show for it. The disappointing results of the investigation led Callahan to send a report to his uncle. The response was prompt and decisive: Callahan was to return to Boston immediately. The news left Callahan with a sense of unfinished business and deep concern for the people of Exeter. He informed the Major of his departure, who expressed his appreciation for Callahan's efforts and lamented the unresolved nature of the case. Callahan then had difficult conversations with Margaret and Anne, who were both disheartened by his imminent departure. Despite his feelings of guilt and failure, Callahan remained determined to make one last appeal to the townspeople. With Anne's help, he arranged to speak at the church service, hoping someone might come forward with crucial information. His heartfelt plea emphasized the importance of justice and the community's role in solving the mystery of the missing women. Sunday morning, Callahan addressed the congregation, sharing his dedication to finding the missing women and seeking justice for their families. His speech was a mixture of personal reflection and a call to action, urging anyone with information to come forward. The response was subdued, and Callahan knew his time in Exeter was nearing its end without the resolution he had hoped for. As Callahan packed his belongings and prepared to leave, he left a heartfelt letter for Margaret, expressing his gratitude for her support. He also resolved to confront his uncle in Boston and advocate for sending another marshal to continue the investigation in Exeter. On the day of his departure, Callahan quietly made his way to the livery stable, where Charlie had Max ready for him. Callahan expressed his gratitude to Charlie, then rode Max to the train station. At the station, as he reviewed his journal, a mysterious note fell out. It was a final twist, offering an unexpected glimmer of hope as Callahan waited for the train to take him back to Boston. Chapter 22, The Reaper Has a Face. Anne, concerned about Billy's persistent cough, decides to visit Dr. Metcalf late at night. Upon reaching his office, she finds the door unlocked and enters, calling out for the doctor. She discovers a secret door leading to a basement, where she sees cages and blood-stained walls. Dr. Metcalf, who surprises her from behind, overpowers her and knocks her out with ether. Marshal Sean Callahan, who had been investigating Dr. Metcalf, arrives just in time and confronts the doctor. Despite the doctor's attempt to attack Sean with a scalpel, Sean shoots and kills him. The major, hearing the gunshot, rushes in and assists Sean. They discover a hidden tunnel where they find Dr. Metcalf's supposedly dead wife, now a vampire, imprisoned behind bars. Nearby, they also find Tracy Mahoney, one of the missing women, alive but in terrible condition. The major decides to take drastic action to prevent the vampire from escaping, while Sean focuses on rescuing Tracy and Anne. The major sets the vampire and the basement ablaze. Sean takes Tracy to the major's home, where she is reunited with her son, Billy, and begins to recover. The major fetches another doctor from a neighboring town to provide medical care for Tracy and Anne. Summary of Chapter 23, Professor Zurich and the Truth. In Chapter 23, Sean Callahan and Major Lancaster bid each other farewell at the train station as Sean prepares to return to Boston. On the train ride home, Sean reflects on his time in Exeter, the challenges he faced, and the lives he saved. Despite feeling a mix of relief and sorrow, he finds solace in knowing that justice was served, even if not entirely as he had hoped. Upon arriving in Boston, Sean reports to the Federal Building, where he is greeted with an unexpected celebration. Fellow marshals, including Bixby and the sergeant, congratulate him on successfully resolving the case in Exeter. The colonel, who is running for senator, praises Sean's efforts and promises to leverage the story for his campaign. Sean is introduced to Professor Zurich, a specialist in international crimes and vampire lore. Over lunch, the professor inquires about Francisco Escobar, a mysterious figure linked to the supernatural events in Exeter. Sean recounts his experiences and learns about the reality of vampires from Zurich. The professor confirms Sean's suspicions about Dr. Metcalf's wife, Carmela, being turned into a vampire by Escobar. The chapter concludes with Sean, Zurich, and the colonel forming a special unit dedicated to hunting and eradicating vampires in the United States. This alliance marks the beginning of a new chapter in Sean's career, involving secretive and dangerous missions. Sean also secures a position for his friend Tommy Christian in the Marshals, ensuring a trusted ally in their future endeavors. The chapter ends with a sense of hope and purpose as Sean looks forward to reuniting with Anne and continuing his life, now enriched by his extraordinary experiences. And that's a wrap for this thrilling horror book, The Reaper of Washington County. From supernatural mysteries to heroic deeds, Sean Callahan's story has kept us on the edge of our seats. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this summary, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell icon to stay updated with our latest content. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below with your key takeaways from the book and let us know which book you'd like us to summarize next. Until next time, happy reading.